In order, so we'll call to order the meeting of the Finance Committee. Meeting jointly with personnel.
For the roll call, Haniro,
Here.
Olson,
Here.
Kuhn,
Here.
and Ramsey is absent and excused.
Okay.
Do you have quorum?
All right, first item of business is the approval of the minutes. June 7th, 2022 Personnel and Finance Committees meeting jointly.
I will move approval for the Personnel Committee.
I will second that.
I'll move approval for Finance.
Second that. Just a question, if possible, Brian, could we, instead of saying all present when you do minutes, could we spell out who the members are at that time? Because if you're looking back down the road, then you'll know who they are. And there was under miscellaneous, Dan Ramsey was, there's a misspelling there of his name. It's Ramsey, so just, that's the only other thing.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll make that change in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, and I have no objections to those changes. All right, any further discussion? Hearing none, then for Finance, all those in favor of approving the minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right.
For Personnel, all those in favor of approval of the minutes, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Personnel minutes.
Okay, moving on to resolutions. We have one. It's Resolution 2022-71, establishing 2023 wages and salaries for non-represented employees.
I will move approval for Personnel.
This is Kuhn, I'll second.
I'll move approval for Finance.
And Olson will second.
All right, any discussion?
One note I'd like to make, if someone downloaded the packet physically prior to the meeting, we made some administrative corrections to a couple of numbers, just a misalignment of longevity. The overall totals did not change. It's just a difference in the way that longevity versus base salary was calculated.
Okay, any further discussion? Hearing none, all those on Finance in favor of approving Resolution 2022-71 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, the ayes have it.
Okay, I'll do this next item, then notification of acceptance of proposed holiday and vacation changes to maintain benefit parity with WPPA.
I don't think we got to vote on personnel on the.
Personnel, all those in favor of Resolution 2022-71, establishing the 23 wage and salary for non-represented employees, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Miscellaneous 1, notification of acceptance of proposed holiday and vacation changes to maintain benefit parity by WPPA Local 427. For personnel, so to make a motion?
This is Kuhn, I'll make that motion.
This is Olson, I'll make the second for personnel.
All right, and for Finance, I'll make that motion to approve notification of acceptance of proposed holiday and vacation changes to maintain benefit parity by WPPA Local 427.
Olson, I'll second that. I just want to make a comment, I was glad to see that this was happening. I didn't know that they were going to be able to get the Martin Luther King Jr. Day and the extra personnel, but I think this is the right thing to do, for sure.
Absolutely. As soon as the changes were approved, I talked to the city administrator and finance director, and we reached directly out to the local to make sure that we were doing the right thing from both a labor relations standpoint and from simply an employee standpoint, that we maintain equity between those supervisors and the members in the unit, and between the non-represented employees in the city and the members of this bargaining unit. I truly appreciate that you take this recommendation and approve it.
It's a good thing, so. Any further discussion for personnel? We have the motion in a second, right?
I want to make sure we do, okay, yeah.
Any further discussion? Luke, do you have any comments?
Nope.
Okay. All those in favor of the notification of acceptance of the proposed holiday and vacation changes to maintain benefit parity with WPPA Local 427, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All right, and for finance, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, the ayes have it. Personnel,
Okay, we will adjourn. Okay, I need a motion to adjourn the Personnel Committee.
This is Kuhn. I'll make that motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Personnel is adjourned. And Brian likes it when I tell him, yeah, you're right. It only took 5 minutes. Finance.
We'll have about 10 minutes that the Finance Committee needs to be in recess until 6:30.
yep. Finance Committee. First item is the approval of the minutes of the November 15th, 2022 Finance Committee meeting.
This is Alder Kuhn. I'll make that motion.
Thank you.
Olson, second.
All right, any discussion? I had one suggested correction, and that is, my recollection is that the suggestion for how to handle the proceeds from a future sale of the fuel truck was an amendment to my original motion that came from Alder Olson. So I'd like the minutes to reflect that amendment and that it was accepted. Any concerns?
That's, yeah.
All right. Okay. All right, all those in favor of approving the minutes of the November 15th, 2022 Finance Committee meeting signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, the ayes have it. Audit of the bills to be paid. Bill, were there any additions or changes?
Yeah, I do have two additions tonight. The first is to Findorf. This is for the work on the City Hall stairs and railing going down to the Public Works lower level. That amount is $24,915. And the second is pay request number 2 for the Tribeca Pond TIF agreement payment. That would go to Tribeca Commercial Properties, and the dollar amount is $193,317.50.
Okay. All right, can I get a motion
I'll
to-
make a motion to approve the bills. This is Olson,
with the changes?
with the additions, yeah.
This is Alder Kuhn. I'll second that.
All right, any further discussion? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the ayes have it. Moving on to resolutions, we have two. First one is Resolution 2022-69, approving the issuance of a tax incremental revenue bond for the Trotta project at 3001 Parmenter Street.
This is Olson, I'll move approval.
Thank you, and I'll second that. Any discussion or updates from staff?
No updates. If you'd like me to give kind of an overview of the different items related to Trotta on the agenda, I'd be happy to, or I can answer questions.
Members?
Um,
It probably would be helpful, Bill, if you could walk through the timeline that you and I talked about.
Sure. Yeah, so currently the owner of the property is Impact Parmenter, which is an LLC created by Impact 7, and the city has an existing TIF agreement, and they've submitted documentation for issuance of a TIF bond. So the first item on the agenda would be issuing that TIF bond for the project to the current owner of the property. My understanding of the timeline is that Impact 7, Impact Parmenter, have been in discussions with Wisconsin Housing Preservation Corp., or WHPC, to purchase the property with the intent of closing before the end of this year, although there is some language in the revisions that would allow for an extension through January if it takes additional time to close. If that goes forward, then there would be the item under the agreements, the First Amendment to the Development Agreement, which authorizes the sale to WHPC, that with that sale, the rights of the TIF agreement and the TIF bond would be transferred to WHPC. There will be a property tax bill generated this year that'll be coming out shortly here in December. My understanding is that if the sale goes forward, WHPC, as the new owner, would pay the taxes. They would receive the first TIF increment payment under the bond for this tax year. WHPC has indicated they would like to seek property tax exemption. They would, upon seeking property tax exemption and with the payment in lieu of taxes agreement with the city, the rights under the TIF agreement would be terminated following the payment of the TIF payment for this year, and then in future years, beginning with the 2023 tax year, in lieu of the TIF agreement and those rights being in place, WHPC would be making a payment in lieu of taxes directly to the city, and the dollar amount of that is spelled out in the agreement, starting at $91,000 per year with a 2% escalator. So we kind of have these different steps of approving the current TIF bond, the amendment to the TIF agreement, which would allow for the sale and for the transfer of the rights under the TIF agreement, and then the payment in lieu of taxes agreement, which would, after this tax year, terminate those rights under the TIF agreement and replace it with the payment in lieu of taxes. Good?
Any questions or discussion?
One nuance, and it's only a nuance. This changeover would obviously require the new owner to submit an application for tax exemption to the assessor, and the assessor to approve that. That's, since that nothing has been pre-approved in that regard, so it will have to be approved or else it will continue to be taxable.
Thank you for that nuance. All right, if there's no further discussion, all those in favor of approving Resolution 2022-69, approving the issuance of a tax incremental revenue bond for the Trotta project at 3001 Parmenter Street, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Now, we move on to resolution number 2, which is Resolution 2022-72, authorizing the establishment of the 2023 Emergency Medical Services Fee Schedule.
Olson, I'll move approval.
Thank you.
This is Alder Kuhn, I'll second.
Thank you. Any discussion or Chief, would you like to say a few words? I had a question. It does say none for fiscal impact, but then in your memo, you made a reference to the budget city's budget appears to be balanced, which made me wonder, is this change going to make our budget no longer balanced? Thank you.
Yeah, actually, and just to give you a quick rundown of how this works.
Turn the mic on.
Oh,
Sorry.
how's that? Wonderful. All right. Every year when we go through this exercise, there's usually, I will call it a 4-increment process. We submit the original budget, then there's kind of, after the September numbers come in, we do another little adjustment so that you can kind of get an up-to-date thing. And then there was one final one before the budget that went before you on November 10th. And then now finally we've got the full year out there. So bottom line is, there are things that change along the way. Call volume projections. We had a big deal this year about Medicaid projections due to some funding changes there, as well as kind of related other issues that had to do with the rate schedule itself. And the bottom line is what this effect will do in conjunction with some other revised revenue estimates is actually improve the bottom line about $35,349. Okay, so it doesn't make the budget that was before you any worse. It makes it better, but probably more importantly is our goal, as was in my memo, is not so much to just balance the city budget. It's to try to look at our overall EMS operations and maintain these target amounts. About 60 to 66% is paid for by the users. The remaining part is paid by the taxpayers. So by doing this rate increase, we will hit just a hair above 60%, which is where we always try to be out there. So that in of itself is really how we try to maintain a philosophy that's been out there for as long as I've been here, or at least shortly after I got here back in 1994. For your own, I guess, comfort, if you will, I went out based on the request that the mayor put out and collected the comparative information, and I think the mayor had believed that we were at the top of the actual cost indexes compared to our other neighbors, but in fact we're really quite in the middle. And I was also said in my memo out there, EMS provisions does not work like retail, competition out there. In other words, we don't run a sale one day looking to get some more ambulance calls to bring in revenue. We have to deal with what our geographical district provides us. We are obligated to, maintain readiness and provide service as needed. And there's, of course, costs, and now, like everything else, inflationary costs that we must bear. So we want to not wait, multiple years and then suddenly have to do a huge increase. Try to keep it doing it little by little every year so there aren't any, shocks. And there's been threats in the past on, whether this is ever reality. that sometimes the state legislature is always looking for ways to exercise undue control on local municipalities, and they have hinted in the past of trying to control rate changes or fee changes at the local government level. So this is not one of them. They're not at that point, but that's another reason to make sure we keep ahead of what the economic indicators are telling us and not put ourselves behind the 8 ball. So if that answers your questions, yes.
I just wanted to share that I appreciated that background analysis by Stout.
Jack Stout, yep.
Yeah, I learned a little bit in there. I kind of had a feel for it, but I really enjoyed that. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, he's probably one of the forefront leaders in the EMS industry out there. I would consider myself one of his disciples. I've studied his stuff for many years, and the guy was brilliant. And he's actually helped immensely about dealing with healthcare financing, particularly in the EMS arena out there. He's a well-respected individual. So.
Great. Any further questions or discussion? Thank you, Chief. Hearing none, all those in favor of approving Resolution 2022-72, authorizing the establishment of the 2023 Emergency Medical Services Fee Schedule, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great, the ayes have it. Moving on to agreements and contracts. First item is the First Amendment to Development Agreement with Impact Parmenter LLC for Tax Increment District Number 5 Assistance for the Trotta Project at 3001 Parmenter Street. I'll move approval.
Mrs. Olson, second.
Thank you. Any discussion or questions? I had a question about what does it mean that it's substantially completed, this project?
Well, I will take a stab at it. I would think that,
Larry, yeah, can you move your mic closer?
oh,
Thank you.
going the wrong way. Substantially complete is a term of art, which suggests that the building is ready except for punch list approval of any remaining minor items. So it's essentially an almost complete building, but it hasn't been approved for occupancy yet.
And without looking at where the specific reference is, I think that's a term that's typically used in TIF agreements, that the project needs to be substantially complete before we begin the review of the TIF eligible cost, basically indicating that the primary construction costs are finalized, and if they are not at occupancy, they are very close to that. My understanding is that the building does have occupancy in place at this point, and I think some of that language may have been a reference back to the language that was in the original TIF agreement.
Thank you. And then also, Bill, could you scroll on to the next page? Right there. So the date at the top, January 21, 2023, is that supposed to be January 21 or should it be 31?
I believe that should be January 31st. I haven't had a chance to connect with Matt Fleming, who drafted this document this afternoon, but looking back at the email correspondence regarding this, I believe the intent was for both this and the reference in the next item to be January 31st of 2023. Is that correct, Mike? Okay.
Okay. Well, I guess we can leave it as January 21 and amend it if it turns out that was accidental. That is a Saturday, so. All right, okay, if there's no further discussion, all those in favor of the First Amendment to Development Agreement with Impact Parmenter LLC for Tax Increment District Number 5 Assistance for the Trotta Project at 3001 Parmenter Street, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, the ayes have it. Next up is the payment in lieu of taxes agreement with Wisconsin Housing Preservation Corp. for the Trotta Project at 3001 Parmenter Street.
Olson, I'll move approval.
I'll second that. All right, any discussion? All right. Hearing none, all those in favor of the payment in lieu of taxes agreement with Wisconsin Housing Preservation Corp., for the Trotta project at 3001 Parmenter Street, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, the ayes have it. Moving on to the third item, agreement for tax increment finance districts 3 and 5, redevelopment services for 2023, Vanderwall and Associates, Inc.
I'll move approval.
All right, I'll second that. Any discussion? I had asked Bill earlier what is a major project as referred to in this agreement as one of the work elements. And learned that apparently we don't define it. It's more of a you know it when you see it, or when staff needs to get guidance on it, so.
Well, I think I've seen this language at least 10 times before, since these have been extended on a year-to-year basis. And I'm almost certain it hasn't changed at any time since its initial usage.
And you don't see a need to define what a major project is?
No, I don't.
Okay, fair enough. All right, then, all those if there's no further discussion, all those in favor of approving the agreement for tax increment finance districts 3 and 5 redevelopment services for 2023 with Vanderwall and Associates, Inc., signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? All right, the ayes have it. Moving on to miscellaneous. We have one item, and that is recommendation for a 0.5% for arts program for TIF districts. Comes to us from the Arts Committee.
Olson, I'll move approval.
And I'll second that. All right, discussion.
Abby, do you have anything you'd like to say? I have some comments too, so.
I could just provide an overview of what's being proposed. So the Middleton Arts Committee has been in existence since about 2005. And in 2009, we received a grant from the Wisconsin Arts Board, and we did the first city master plan for public art and design, working with a consultant out of the Twin Cities. And that plan had a recommendation for a segregated, non-lapsing public art fund that would be used to promote, create, and maintain public art, and that each year the council would designate 1% of its capital budget into the fund. And really that was modeled after the Percent for Arts programs that are in place all over the country. It's a pretty common mechanism for funding public art, typically tied to a municipality's capital budget, and usually projects that would benefit from artistic enhancement. So a lot of times it's applied only to new public buildings, new public parking structures. Recently, the city of Madison has been applying it to road projects. So the Monroe Street redesign included a % for public art in that project as well. At that time, in 2009, the Common Council did not support moving forward with tying the Percent for Art program to the city's capital budget. They actually approved the ordinance that was being put forward to establish the committee, to lay out the framework of what the committee would be recommending and what powers and duties and responsibilities the committee had, the makeup of the committee. They approved everything in the ordinance with the exception of the funding mechanism. And so what that led to was over many years, the Public Arts Committee has done fundraising for projects. We successfully fundraised for a roundabout sculpture in on Parmenter Street, and then by the time that the committee had gone through the efforts and actually raised the funds, the DOT determined that they didn't want us to place the sculpture. And so that was like many years of work on behalf of the committee, really with committee member volunteers going out and doing the fundraising work. So that has led to, we have been successful in completing some projects. We did a kind of Percent for Arts project with the police station and municipal court facility. So the Pheasant Branch Impressions project, which is the stained glass reflecting scenes from the Conservancy, that was incorporated as part of the design and construction of the building. We incorporated public art into the Stonehorse Green project. That was really well received from a private fundraising standpoint. And then really they've focused on smaller scale projects that don't require a substantial investment. So we did the Love Your Neighbor mural that's at the entryway into the downtown, and some other smaller projects. What the committee has been working on really the last few years, I remember making a presentation in person at a January retreat, so that was pre-pandemic times, is trying to lay out a framework for how we could implement a percent for arts program, but tie it to the TIF districts. Both of the TIF district project plans incorporate public art as an eligible use of funds. And so what the Arts Committee is recommending is that we would implement a program that would require 1/2 of 1% of TIF awards to be dedicated to public art. And they recommend that, and they lay out a couple of options, one of them being that a developer would incorporate some artistic enhancements onto their own property, as long as it's visible to the public from a right-of-way. And then the second option would be that the developer would simply direct the funds into a non-lapsing fund of the city. After talking with our TIF project management team, as well as a couple other folks, I got some guidance that it might be simpler to just designate an annual line item for a percent for arts fund within the TIF district budgets that would approximate what that 0.5% of private development TIF incentives would be annually. So I kind of roughed those numbers out, and it looks like it might be between 35 and 50,000 total annually. And that kind of depends on where we decide to go with which projects are included in the calculations and whether we're exempting nonprofit and affordable housing projects. And then, of course, TIF incentives fluctuate annually. So the other benefit in terms of going with option 1 in the memo is that it would be easier to administer from a city side, but it would also provide the Arts Committee with some certainty in what their annual budget is. They would still need to go through a competitive process and bring contracts and get projects approved through the normal city process, but that would allow them to plan going forward if they wanted to do a larger project. Like I know in Madison, they're doing some larger projects within their public parks. If they wanted to do something larger that would exceed that annual allocation, if we had those funds segregated into a non-lapsing fund, that would enable them to do more advanced planning. So I think there are some benefits to going with option 1. I know that there are a few members of the Arts Committee that would like to come and speak at the council tonight. Other than that, I'm happy to answer any questions or take any feedback from the Finance Committee.
Thank you, Abby. Any questions?
I just wondered, have you gotten any feedback on this from a developer at all?
We did reach out to a couple, but this is going back now a couple of years. So I know we spoke with Jacob Klein about it, and he was not the impetus for including the exemption for affordable housing. He was actually quite supportive of the direction and has been incorporating site-specific public art into his own projects. He has a sculpture at Meadow Ridge. So he was very supportive. He did not flinch at the dollar amount, the 0.5% of the TIF incentive. I don't recall if I spoke with other developers. I know that we do have other developers in town that are very supportive of public art. We have some that helped with fundraising at the Stonehorse Green, and I know I have not spoken with Terrence Wall about the project, but I know that he has been supportive typically of the arts and has incorporated artwork into some of his projects as well.
Can I ask another question?
Yes.
Of the two options, the first one says it's easier to administer. I think it's important that we don't overlook affordable housing as having artwork in it. And would it be more likely if we go with option 1 that the affordable housing would have some component available for the public art?
Yes, but I got the same question from Alderwoman Hanairo earlier, and I think that you're right, that every multifamily housing development should have access to the arts. And the whole idea behind public art is that you don't have to go into a museum to see artwork. You can see it out in the public realm and public spaces every day. It may not be on that particular site, but we do have a lot of affordable housing that's being infilled along Parmenter Street, and Parmenter Street is the spine of public art as envisioned in the city's master plan. So I'm sure there are lots of opportunities that would be publicly visible where we could incorporate artwork that would benefit all of the properties, not just market rate multifamily. We would want everyone to be able to have equal access to that.
That sounds great. Thanks.
Yep. And I just wanted to clarify a few things. So under option 1, we would own the art, and we could own it under option 2 that's showing, under the first item, if the developers contribute to our fund. But if the developers commission city-approved public art, they would own the art.
Yes,
And maintain it.
and maintain
And
it.
maintain it.
And the option 1, we maintain it.
We would have to maintain it under option 1. Yeah, if it's city-owned on city property, we would incur the maintenance obligations.
Okay. And then none of our peer cities have anything like this, right?
There really isn't anything in Dane County that's tied to TIF projects. So Madison has a % for arts, but theirs is tied to their own capital budget. And then Green Bay has a % for arts that's tied to TIF, but I wouldn't really consider them a peer city. Theirs also is much more aggressive in terms of the amount, because theirs is 1% of the total anticipated assessed value for a TIF project. So it's 1% of the whole value, whereas ours is 0.5% of the TIF incentive. And typically a TIF incentive would not exceed, we'll say, 15% of a project's assessed value. So it's a much lower amount.
Is that Green Bay, when you talk about Green Bay, that's not where like Lambeau Field, that's in Ashwaubenon, that's a little different, right? So, I mean, there's so much more funds flowing through there, and for like our tourism and stuff, that it's so important to have these kind of amenities. I just think this is very important. I need, when we do planning and you're working with the developers, we make sure they do landscaping appropriately. We have the aesthetics of the architecture, and this is just another very important piece it'll enhance. Middleton's a desirable place to build, and I want to make sure these developers are on board with all that. It's very important to have public art.
I agree. As somebody who spent many years in Chicago, both as a kid and in graduate school, public art is just an amazing thing to add to the city, and I hope we'll have some in the downtown in addition to Parmenter. I also would want to make sure that, I'll say when this passes council, and we go forward with it, that we come up with very accurate, crystal clear messaging so that the public isn't led to believe that we use their tax increase to pay for this. I know it's very easy for misinformation to get out there, and I just want to make sure that we're on top of it so that won't happen. Okay, so any further discussion?
I like this because we're going to be bold and we're going to be deliberate in getting the art pieces out there. Right now, it's just been so slow trying to pick up steam on this. I just think it's going to be a good thing.
Great. All right, then, all those in favor of the recommendation for a 0.5% for arts program for TIF district signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, the ayes have it.
And just a clarification, is that based on option 1 as recommended?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
What's your question?
If we need to reconsider, we can do that.
Okay, well, we can discuss it. I don't know, you need to know which one it was.
Well, we're voting in council, right?
Yeah.
We'll move it forward and pick it up there.
That's okay for your motion?
Yeah, my impression was, since the motion was to recommend approval as recommended, that would include the recommendation for option
Did I
1.
make the motion, or did you make?
You made the motion.
I'll make a motion that we adopt option one. I'll amend my motion to adopt option one.
Okay. Do
Who
we,
seconded it?
do we need to go through the process of reconsidering, since we just? That's why I was going to suggest we just, at the council meeting,
Well, I want to make it easy for Bill. I mean, what he was looking for a direction.
Bill, what are your thoughts? We have time.
I would defer to Larry, but my thought would be, at this point, it's not a final action, it's a recommendation. I don't know if we need to formally reconsider and revote if the maker and second are in agreement that that was the intent.
Yeah.
Okay, I agree. All
Okay.
right,
Then do we re-vote on it after we?
we'll make that clear in the council
Yep.
meeting and vote, make sure it's option one that we're talking about.
Sounds good.
Okay. All right, we have nothing else on the agenda, so I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
This is Alder Kuhn. I'll make that motion.
Thank
Wilson, second?
All right, any discussion? If not, all those in favor of adjourning signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, stand adjourned.